I just faced my worst nightmare. The HOA president sent men to intimidate me into selling our 200-year-old ranch. And her reason? She said they need it for an access road to their next subdivision. Funny thing is, the only thing that got tested that night was how fast all her men hit the floor. Let me start from the beginning. The glass didn't break. It detonated. I was upright before the last shard settled. Training doesn't vanish on a ranch, it hibernates. One breath to clear the fog, one glance at my wife, Fran, and her wide eyes, one finger to my lips. The house went from bedroom to battlefield between heartbeats. Fran was already sitting straight up, clutching the sheets to her chest. Her eyes were wide, two dark pools of fear in the pale moonlight filtering through our bedroom window. It was the same look she had when she'd meet me at the airfield, not knowing if the man walking off the plane was the same one who'd left. It was a look I had sworn she would never have to have again. Seeing it now felt like a personal failure, a promise broken. It stoked a fire in my gut that had been dormant for 5 long years, cold, precise, and utterly unforgiving. I gave the signal again, and she knew the drill. Stay put, stay quiet. I slid down the hall, barefoot, steady. The cabin on the rise, creek whispering outside. 2 centuries of Petersons built this refuge. Tonight, it wasn't refuge. 2 shapes drifted across my living room, clumsy and loud, acting like they rented the place by the minute. Message men, not thieves. One of them was poking at the new flat-screen TV we'd just bought. He was probably calculating how much he could get for it at a pawn shop. The other one had picked up a small frame painting from the mantelpiece. He was holding it up to the moonlight, his head cocked. I almost laughed. The painting was a watercolor of a lopsided sunflower made by our 7-year-old niece. Its monetary value was precisely 0. Its sentimental value was everything. And that, right there, was the whole problem in a nutshell. These people, and the woman who sent them, didn't understand the difference. No gun, noise brings paperwork. I wanted quiet. The fire poker waited on the hearth, black iron, honest weight. The kind of tool that doesn't jam or miss. Fran's dad gave it to split logs. Tonight, it would split intentions. I stepped into their orbit and let gravity do the work. The TV man blinked, confusion, then lights out. Iron-kissed skull, a dull thud, and he folded like bad scaffolding. I didn't speed up. I narrowed. The other guy, Mr. Art Critic, dropped the painting. It clattered to the floor. He spun around, his face a mask of shock and rage. He was bigger than his friend, and he was holding a short, thick crowbar. "What the?" He started to yell. He didn't finish. He charged, swinging the crowbar in a wide, telegraphed arc aimed at my head. It was a powerful swing, full of anger, but it was slow and clumsy. I dipped under it easily, the wind from its passage ruffling my hair. As he stumbled past me, off balance, I brought the poker up in a short, sharp jab. The tip caught him directly under the chin. His teeth clicked together with a sound that made my own jaw ache. His head snapped back violently and his eyes rolled up into his skull. He fell backwards, stiff as a board, landing with a heavy boom that shook the floor. 2 down. Silence returned to the house. It was a heavy, thick silence, punctuated only by the ragged sound of my own breathing. Far away, I heard a siren begin its lonely cry. I hadn't called anyone. That would be my neighbor, Freddie. Good old, perpetually panicked Freddie. He lived a quarter-mile down the county road and watched the valley through his blinds like a hawk. A moth bumping against a streetlight was enough to get him on the phone with the police. For the first time, I was grateful for his endless anxiety. I quickly checked the 2 men. Both were breathing, shallow but steady. They were out cold. In the kitchen drawer, tucked behind the aluminum foil, were a few industrial-strength zip ties. A holdover from a past life I couldn't quite shake. In less than a minute, both men were hog-tied, their wrists and ankles secured behind their backs. By the time the first police car pulled up, its lights painting the walls in frantic strokes of red and blue, the scene was contained. The taller deputy clocked the broken window, then my zip-tie handiwork, then me, bare feet, steady hands. "You military?" he asked. "Used to be," I said. He nodded once like that explained the floor decor. While they read rights and checked pulses, I lined the intruders' phones on the counter and slid a steel mixing bowl over them to choke the signals. Old habit. One lock screen glowed with a text preview, "Confirm delivery. Key under planter." No name, just a Cedar Valley address. Fran appeared at the bottom of the stairs, her robe pulled tight around her. She looked at the 2 unconscious forms on our new area rug. Then her eyes found mine. The fear was gone. In its place was a look of weary resignation. "This is her, isn't it?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. I didn't need to ask who her was. There was only one person it could be. Karen Grant, President, Treasurer, and Supreme Leader of the Cedar Valley Homeowners Association. We'd been getting her violation notices for weeks, clipped, passive-aggressive little notes about the exact shade of our front door, the unauthorized species of flowers in our garden beds, the placement of our garbage cans. We thought it was just the petty obsession of a bored woman with too much power. We were wrong. This was something else entirely. "Yeah, Fran," I said, my voice low. "I think it is." The doorbell chimed, sharp and demanding. The police were here. I looked at the shattered window, the broken glass glittering like diamonds on the floor. I looked at the 2 thugs I had just neutralized in my own living room. This wasn't about enforcing bylaws anymore. This was a declaration of war. Karen Grant had just made her opening move, and it was a loud one. She clearly thought I was just another suburban dad who would be scared into submission. She had no idea who I was or what I was capable of. But as I walked to the door to greet the police, I had a sinking feeling she was about to find out, and our quiet life was officially over. Deputies hit the porch with eyes wide, hands steady. I gave them the short version and the long receipts, 2 gift-wrapped intruders, porch cam angles, timestamps. They bagged the evidence while Dawn bleached the hills. Daniels logged the weapons and statements and posted a unit on our street while detectives canvassed. 5 years ago, I walked away from a life where this sort of thing was Tuesday. I won't bore you with the details. Let's just say I worked for the government in a capacity that didn't involve filing paperwork. My job was to go to dangerous places and deal with dangerous people. I was good at it, too good. But that kind of work chips away at your soul. It leaves scars you can't see. One day, I looked in the mirror and didn't recognize the man staring back. The only thing that felt real anymore was Fran. She was my anchor, the one person who saw past the monster to find the man. For her, I quit. I came home. We decided we wanted normal. Boring. We wanted a life where the biggest drama was deciding what to have for dinner. Across the county road sat Cedar Valley Estates, matchstick mailboxes, surgically green lawns, rules thick enough to choke a bull. We paid for quiet. What we bought was a woman with a clipboard and a taste for control. Our first introduction to the rot was Karen Grant. She introduced herself the day we moved in. She didn't bring a welcome basket. She brought a clipboard and a measuring tape. A tall woman in her 50s, with hair sprayed into a helmet and eyes that looked like 2 little chips of ice. She smiled, but it never reached her eyes. She handed us a 300-page binder. "The community bylaws," she'd said, her voice crisp and devoid of any warmth. "I trust you'll familiarize yourselves with them. We pride ourselves on maintaining standards here at the Cedar Valley." She wasn't welcoming us. She was warning us. The first few months, the warnings were just annoying. A notice that our garbage cans were visible from the street for 2 hours too long on trash day. A fine because the flowers Fran planted by the walkway weren't on the approved list of perennial flora. A letter, complete with photographic evidence, showing that the paint on our trim was sun-kissed ivory instead of the mandated whispering wheat. It was maddening. It was the kind of petty tyranny that makes you want to scream. But we paid the fines. We replaced the flowers. We repainted the trim. We just wanted to be left alone. We wanted peace, and peace apparently had a price. Late that afternoon, Grant's Lexus rolled up the ranch road, 2 suits in tow, one with a briefcase, one with a tablet. She thrust a transfer acknowledgement tied to a forged deed into my hand. I tore it in half. Her smile died. The snub-nosed revolver cleared her blazer, steady and cold. "Last chance," she said. I stepped in, twisted her wrist, and she went down hard in the gravel, the gun popping once as it jerked skyward. The shot tore harmlessly through the barn's tin roof. No one was targeted. Down the ridge, red and blue lights crested the hill as Sheriff Daniels' truck barreled toward us. The suits froze. Daniels rolled up with lights still spinning. took the revolver into evidence, logged the forged papers, and radioed his deputies to stop Grant's men when they tried to bolt. Fran was the one who bore the brunt of it. I'd come home from my consulting job, a boring desk job I'd taken that used my brain but not my old skills, and find her frustrated, another white envelope from the HOA in her hand. It was a war of 1,000 paper cuts, and Karen Grant was bleeding us dry, one $25 fine at a time. My wife, my strong, resilient Fran, was starting to look stressed. The light in her eyes was dimming. This perfect neighborhood was becoming her prison, and Karen was the warden. Then came the break-in. This wasn't a fine. This wasn't a letter. This was a violent physical escalation. This crossed a line. Those two weren't random burglars. They were sent. And the only person who had a problem with us was Karen Grant. But why? Why go from complaining about flower colors to sending thugs to my home? It didn't make sense. The risk was huge. The potential payoff? What? Scaring us into... what? Planting the right flowers? It was a massive overreaction. I stood in my quiet kitchen, the coffee maker gurgling, and stared out at the perfect, peaceful street. Nothing about this added up. Karen Grant was intelligent. Her campaign of harassment had been surgical, always staying within the twisted logic of the HOA bylaws. She was a snake, not a sledgehammer. Sending 2 goons to my house was a sledgehammer move. It was messy. It was reckless. Which meant one of 2 things. Either she was getting desperate, or the stakes of this game were much, much higher than a perfectly manicured lawn. I didn't know what she was really after, but I knew I was done playing defense. It was time to find out what Karen Grant truly wanted, and I had a feeling the answer wasn't in the HOA handbook. The first step in any conflict is to know your enemy. The problem was, all I knew about Karen Grant was that she was the iron-fisted ruler of our suburban paradise and had an unhealthy obsession with beige paint. I needed more. The police weren't going to be much help. The 2 guys from my living room, they had lawyered up the second they regained consciousness and were claiming they were just looking for a friend's house and got confused. It was a joke, but a joke that would tie things up in legal knots for months. I was on my own. It was a familiar feeling. My first move was to try the civilized approach. Maybe this was all a giant, insane misunderstanding. Fran thought I was crazy. "You can't reason with a hurricane, Alex," she warned me. She was probably right, but I had to try. I had to show that I had exhausted all the peaceful options before I resorted to my own. There was an HOA meeting that Thursday. The agenda: a discussion on seasonal lawn aeration and new holiday decoration guidelines. It sounded about as thrilling as watching paint dry. But at the bottom of the agenda, under new business, residents could speak for 3 minutes. I was going to use my 3 minutes. The meeting was held in the community clubhouse, a sterile room that smelled of chlorine from the nearby pool and faint desperation. About 30 of my neighbors were there. They all had the same look, a sort of tired, defeated haze in their eyes. They looked like prisoners at a parole hearing they knew they were going to lose. At the front of the room, on a slightly raised platform, sat Karen Grant and her 2 bored cronies, a mousy woman named Brenda and a beefy man named Gary, who looked like he'd lost a fight with a tanning bed. Karen ran the meeting like a drill sergeant. She banged a gavel. She cut people off mid-sentence. She smiled a tight, smug smile every time she overruled a complaint. My neighbor, Freddie, was there. He sat in the front row, clutching a binder full of papers. Freddie was a retired accountant in his late 60s, a small man with glasses that were always slightly crooked. He saw conspiracies everywhere. He cornered me before the meeting started, his voice a conspiratorial whisper. "It's the chemicals, Alex. The ones they're using on the lawns. I've done the research. They're putting something in it to make us more compliant. That's why no one fights back." I patted him on the shoulder. "Thanks for the heads up, Freddie." He was a nice guy, but he was operating on a different frequency from the rest of the world. When my turn came, I walked to the front. I was calm. I was polite. I laid it out clearly. The constant baseless fines. The targeted harassment. And finally, the 2 men who broke into my home just nights before. As I spoke, a murmur went through the crowd. People were nodding. I could see flickers of recognition in their eyes. They'd all gotten a taste of Karen's brand of management. But then I looked at Karen. She wasn't angry. She wasn't defensive. She was bored. She was tapping her pen on her notepad, looking at me like I was a fly buzzing around her head. When my 3 minutes were up, she cut me off. "Thank you, Mr. Peterson. Your time is up." She then addressed the room. "As you know," she said, her voice dripping with fake sympathy, "we've had some issues with our newest resident, Mr. Peterson, failing to comply with community standards. It's sad when one person's refusal to cooperate affects us all." She paused, letting her words sink in. "As for his more dramatic accusations," she continued, "I've spoken with the police. There is no evidence whatsoever linking a random burglary to the HOA. It's a sad sign of our times, but crime can happen anywhere." She made it sound like I was the problem, the troublemaker, the one bringing down the neighborhood. Then came the killing blow. In light of Mr. Peterson's continued violations and his clear disregard for the safety and harmony of our community, I am proposing a special assessment. A gasp went through the room. To cover the legal fees associated with these baseless accusations and to hire a private security patrol to protect us from the element Mr. Peterson seems to attract. She was making them pay for my audacity to fight back. She was turning my neighbors against me. I watched as the flickers of support in their eyes died out, replaced by fear of her, fear of the cost. I stood there, speechless. It was brilliant. A truly devious, intelligent move. In one fell swoop, she had discredited me, isolated me, and solidified her own power. She had taken my reasonable complaint and twisted it into a weapon against me. Fran had been right. You can't reason with a hurricane. As Karen banged her gavel and moved on to the riveting topic of lawn aeration, I walked out of that room. The civilized approach had failed spectacularly. I got into my car and just sat there for a long moment, the angry, frustrated faces of my neighbors flashing in my mind. The line had been drawn. Karen Grant wasn't just a petty tyrant. She was a master manipulator. This wasn't a fight about rules anymore. This was a war for my home, and I was done playing by hers. The days following that disastrous HOA meeting were a masterclass in psychological warfare, and Karen Grant was the grandmaster. The special assessment passed, of course. A crisp new bill for $500 appeared on every doorstep in the Cedar Valley estates, a stark reminder of who was in charge. The memo attached made sure to mention it was for enhanced security and legal contingencies, a thinly veiled reference to me. Suddenly, I was the neighborhood pariah. The friendly waves from neighbors were replaced with quick, downward glances. The casual chats over the fence stopped. I was the guy who was costing everyone money. The guy who was rocking the boat. Karen's attacks became more precise, more personal. She was a scalpel now, not a sledgehammer. A tow truck showed up one morning and hauled my car out of my own driveway. The reason? A tiny, barely noticeable drip of oil on the concrete. It was a violation of Bylaw 74, subsection C, paragraph 2. Maintaining a vehicle in a state of disrepair on common or private property. I had to pay $300 to get my car back, plus a $200 fine to the HOA. The next day, 2 men from a landscaping company showed up and started ripping out Fran's prize-winning rose bushes. They had a work order signed by Karen, citing a violation of the approved foliage list. Fran watched from the window, her face pale, tears streaming down her cheeks. That one cut deep. Those roses were her project, her little piece of beauty in this beige hellscape. They came in waves, roof, paint, structural, clipboards for shields, smiles for citations, legal on paper, predatory in practice, bureaucracy as a weapon. Grant's favorite caliber. My old life had taught me to handle physical threats. Men with guns, men with bombs. I knew the playbook for that. But this was different. How do you fight a 300-page rulebook? How do you combat an enemy who uses fines and liens as weapons? I could feel the pressure mounting. The constant stress was a heavy blanket over our home. Fran stopped tending to her garden. She just sat inside, looking out the window. The joy we'd felt when we first bought this house was gone, replaced by a constant low-grade dread. "Maybe we should just move," she said one night, her voice small. "We could sell. Just give her what she wants." I looked at her, at the dark circles under her eyes. Part of me wanted to say yes, to just pack it all up and run. find another town, another quiet street. But another part of me, the stubborn, angry part, refused. Running felt like letting her win. It felt like abandoning our home, our investment, everything we had worked for, because of a bully. "No," I said, my voice harder than I intended. "We're not running. This is our home." Neighbor Freddie tried to help, in his own unique way. He'd leave cryptic notes in our mailbox. One of them, scrawled on a napkin, just said, "Follow the water." I had no idea what it meant. Another time, he caught me by the curb as I was getting the mail. "She replaced the whole sprinkler system last year," he whispered, looking around nervously. "The whole system for the entire neighborhood. Cost a fortune. Said the old one was inefficient. But I saw the invoices. The company she used, it's owned by her brother-in-law." He looked at me, his eyes wide behind his crooked glasses, expecting a huge reaction. At the time, it just seemed like standard garden variety corruption. A little kickback for a family member. It was slimy, but it didn't explain the personal vendetta against me and Fran. I filed it away as just another piece of Freddie's paranoid rambling. The breaking point came with a certified letter. It was thick. Inside wasn't an invoice. It was a notice of trustee's sale. According to the paperwork, title had transferred 2 weeks earlier via a quitclaim to a land dev pro shell, triggered by invented compatibility fees. The notarization was forged, the substitute trustee a name I'd never heard, and the auction date was circled in red, 30 days out. Foreclosure. They were going to try and take our home. I stood there in my kitchen, the letter shaking in my hand. I could feel the blood pounding in my temples. This was it. This was the end game. All the little cuts, all the harassment, it was all designed to lead to this, to bury us in so much debt and legal trouble that we would either flee or be forced out. Karen Grant didn't just want me to follow the rules. She wanted me gone. She wanted my house. The question was, why? What was so special about this little plot of land that she would go to such extreme, fanatical lengths to get it? The time for being reactive was over. It was time to start digging. It was time to find out who Karen Grant really was, and I was going to use every skill I had to dismantle her world, piece by piece. The decision was made. The moment I read that foreclosure notice, something inside me shifted. The part of me that wanted to be a normal suburban guy, the part that was willing to paint his trim beige and plant approved flowers, went quiet. Another part of me, a part I had kept locked away for 5 years, woke up. The part that dismantles things, people, organizations. It was time to go to work. My first step wasn't to hire a lawyer. My first step was to turn my quiet suburban home into an intelligence-gathering hub. I spent the next 2 days running cables, mounting tiny cameras, and setting up encrypted servers in my basement. I wasn't just looking for dirt on Karen, I was building a fortress of information. I had cameras covering every angle of my property. I had audio bugs, the kind you can buy legally as child safety devices, placed in strategic public locations around the community clubhouse. I put a GPS tracker on my own car, not to see where I was going, but to create a log of every time it was improperly towed or ticketed. I was building a case file, a mountain of evidence so large it couldn't be ignored. Fran watched me work, a worried look on her face. "Be careful, Alex," she said. I just nodded. Careful was my middle name. My target was simple, Karen Grant. I needed to know everything about her, where she went, who she talked to, and most importantly, where her money came from and where it went. I started with open source intelligence, public records, social media, property deeds. It was tedious, but it painted a picture. Karen Grant lived in the biggest house in the Cedar Valley. She drove a brand new luxury SUV. She was divorced, no kids. On paper, her only income was a modest stipend she received as president of the HOA. It didn't add up. The lifestyle she was living cost way more than her declared income. It was a classic red flag. Then I remembered what neighbor Freddie had told me. Follow the water, and his other comment about the sprinkler company owned by her brother-in-law. It had seemed like small-time graft at the time, but maybe it was a thread. I started pulling on it. I looked up the company, Aqualux Irrigation Systems. It was a registered LLC. The owner of record was a man named Martin Page. A quick search showed that Martin Page was, in fact, Karen Grant's brother-in-law. Freddie was right. I dug deeper, pulling up the HOA's financial statements, which were technically public record for all homeowners, though they were buried on a password-protected website that was almost impossible to navigate. That's when I found it. The invoice for the sprinkler project was for nearly $500,000, an astronomical sum. But that wasn't the twist. I started looking at other contracts: landscaping, paving, pool maintenance, security services. Every major contract the HOA had signed in the last 3 years had gone to a company that, after a little digging, I could trace back to a member of Karen's extended family or a shell corporation owned by one of her close associates. She hadn't just given her brother-in-law a contract. She had turned the entire HOA into her own personal slush fund. She was bleeding the whole neighborhood dry, using our fees to enrich her own family and friends through massively inflated contracts. The special assessments, the fines, it wasn't just about power. It was about generating more revenue for her to embezzle. This was big. This was wire fraud. This was racketeering. It was enough to put her away for a long time, but it still didn't feel like the whole story. This level of corruption explained why she wanted to maintain control of the HOA, but it didn't explain the relentless, obsessive campaign against me. Why drive me out specifically? Why risk everything with a clumsy home invasion just to get rid of one resident? There was still a piece missing. The key came from the most unlikely source, Freddie. He showed up at my door one evening, looking more agitated than usual. He was holding a faded, yellowed map. It looked old. The notary seal was weirdly crisp, the same registration number I'd seen on 3 HOA filings from this year. "I found it," he whispered, shoving it into my hands. "In the county archives. I was looking for proof of the mind control chemicals, but I found this instead." It was a plat map of the area from 50 years ago, long before the Cedar Valley was ever built. The land was mostly undeveloped farmland. I looked at the map, confused. "Freddie, what is this?" He pointed a trembling finger at one specific section of the map. Look at the name of the property owner." I squinted at the faded ink. The parcel ID prefix didn't match the era. Somebody had modernized a detail they shouldn't have. The land where the Cedar Valley now stood, the whole sprawling development, was a patchwork of different farms and properties. But my lot, and the 3 lots next to it, were part of a larger, single parcel. And written across that parcel was a name: Grant Family Homestead. Too neat, I thought, and then ignored that tiny alarm. My blood ran cold. It couldn't be a coincidence. I looked up at Freddie, whose eyes were gleaming with the thrill of discovery. He thought he'd found a clue about his chemical conspiracy. He had no idea what he'd really stumbled upon. Karen Grant wasn't just trying to drive me out of a neighborhood. This land, this specific piece of dirt my house was sitting on, used to belong to her family. The petty fines, the harassment, the foreclosure attempt, it wasn't about a beige house or the wrong kind of flowers. This was personal. This was a vendetta. She wasn't trying to evict a troublesome resident. She was trying to reclaim what she believed was hers. And suddenly, her insane, reckless behavior made a terrifying kind of sense. She wasn't just a crook. She was a woman on a holy mission, and my home was her promised land. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. Karen Grant wasn't just a corrupt HOA president. She was a woman trying to settle a half-century-old score. My house wasn't just a house. It was a symbol of something her family had lost. This changed everything. It elevated the conflict from a dispute over money and power to something far more primal and dangerous. A rational person, a common criminal you can predict. You can use their greed against them. But a zealot, someone driven by a deep-seated generational grudge, they're capable of anything. I laid all the evidence out on the dining room table that night. The financial records showing the kickback schemes, the video files from my security cameras documenting the endless harassment, the foreclosure notice, and in the center of it all, the old plat map from Freddie with the name Grant Family Homestead, circled in red. Fran stood beside me, looking at the web I had woven. Her face was a mixture of fear and awe. "So, this entire thing," she said slowly, "all the fines, the letters, the men in our living room, it's all because she wants this specific piece of land back?" "It looks that way," I said. "The corruption is real. That's how she funds her lifestyle and keeps her cronies loyal. But the obsession with us, it's personal. She's trying to force us out so she can buy the property for pennies on the dollar at a foreclosure auction. She wants to reclaim her ancestral home. Fran wrapped her arms around herself. Alex, this is insane. This woman is unhinged. What are we gonna do? That was the question, wasn't it? I had a mountain of evidence, enough to go to the FBI, probably. I could hand over my neat little package, and they would likely open an investigation. It would be the right thing to do, the legal, civilized path. But my past experience taught me that the wheels of justice grind slowly. An investigation could take months, even years. In the meantime, Karen would still be in power. She would know I was the one who tipped them off. Her attacks would escalate. She had already proven she was willing to use violence. Would she stop at sending a couple of clumsy thugs? Or would the next knock on the door be someone more professional, someone I couldn't handle with a fire poker? I looked at Fran, at the fear that had taken root in her eyes. I couldn't risk it. I couldn't put her through a prolonged siege while we waited for the government to save us. This was my moral crossroads. Do I trust the system, a system Karen had so expertly manipulated? Or do I take matters into my own hands? Do I use the evidence I've gathered not to just report her, but to dismantle her? To become the very thing I had tried to leave behind, a man who operates outside the rules to achieve his own definition of justice. The man I used to be wouldn't have hesitated. He would have seen this as just another operation, another target to be neutralized. But the man I had become, Fran's husband, a homeowner, a man who just wanted peace, he hesitated for a moment. We're going to fight her, I said, my voice quiet but firm. But not through the courts, not at first. We're going to fight her on our own terms. Fran looked at me, her expression searching my face. What does that mean? She asked. It means I'm not just going to expose her crimes, I replied. I'm going to use her own tactics against her. Her power comes from the fear and control she has over this neighborhood. Her strength is the illusion that she is untouchable. I'm going to shatter that illusion. I'm going to turn her own community against her. This was a dangerous path. It meant I wasn't just a victim defending himself anymore. It meant I was going on the offensive. It meant deliberately setting a trap, manipulating people, and orchestrating a takedown that was as much about retribution as it was about justice. It felt dark. It felt cold. It felt necessary. The man I was fighting to be, the peaceful man, couldn't win this war. To protect him, to protect his home and his wife, I had to let the other guy out of his cage, just for a little while. I started to formulate a plan to expose Karen not in a sterile courtroom a year from now, but in front of the very people she had terrorized. I would use her own instrument of power, the HOA meeting, as the stage for her downfall. It was a huge risk. If it failed, I would be completely exposed, and her revenge would be swift and terrible. But if it worked, I could end this, once and for all. I looked at the map, at the name of the family that had started all this. They had lost this land once before. I was going to make sure Karen Grant lost it again, and this time, she'd lose everything else along with it. The decision was made. There was no turning back. I just hoped that when it was all over, I could put the monster back in his cage. My plan required one thing I didn't have, an audience. I needed to get the residents of the Cedar Valley estates in one room, but they were terrified of Karen. Calling a meeting myself would be useless. She'd just shut it down. I needed a trigger, an event so outrageous it would force even the most timid homeowner to show up, angry and demanding answers. So I decided to give Karen a little push, to make her overplay her hand. I knew from my surveillance that her two cronies on the HOA board, Brenda and Gary, were weak links. Brenda was nervous and mousy. Gary was arrogant and greedy. I decided to target Gary. Using a spoofed phone number and a voice modulator, I called Gary, pretending to be a contractor from a rival paving company. I told him I knew he was getting kickbacks from the current company, and that I was willing to double them if he steered the upcoming road resurfacing project my way. The greed in his voice was palpable. He took the bait immediately. We arranged a meeting in a public park. He showed up, expecting to meet a fellow crook. Instead, he found a manila envelope on the park bench. Inside were photographs, pictures of him accepting cash from the current contractor, pictures I had taken with a long lens camera over the past week, and one simple note. You're being played. Karen is setting you up to take the fall, talk to a lawyer. It was a lie, of course. Karen wasn't setting him up. But planting that seed of paranoia was all it took. I watched from a distance as Gary's face went from smug to panicked. He ran to his car and sped off. I knew exactly where he was going, straight to Karen, and an arrogant, terrified man like Gary wouldn't be subtle. He would accuse her, threaten her, and in his panic, he would expose the whole rotten scheme to her. Karen, in turn, would have to react. She would have to silence him, and fast. I didn't have to wait long. 2 nights later, it happened. Karen must have called a secret emergency board meeting. I had a tiny audio bug, disguised as a smoke detector, in the clubhouse meeting room. I listened from my basement as Karen, Brenda, and Gary had it out. Gary was yelling, Brenda was crying, and Karen was ice cold. She accused Gary of trying to blackmail her. She fabricated evidence of him embezzling funds. With Brenda as her terrified witness, she voted him off the board and announced she was filing a police report against him first thing in the morning. She was cutting him loose, turning him into the scapegoat for her entire operation. This was the trigger I needed. The next morning, before Karen could file her report, an anonymous email went out to every single resident of the Cedar Valley. The email contained a short, edited audio clip from the meeting, just enough of Gary accusing Karen of the kickback scheme and her threatening him. It also contained a simple message. The HOA board is collapsing. Our fees are being stolen. Demand an emergency meeting. Demand answers. Panic spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. People who had been too afraid to speak up were now furious. Their money was being stolen. The one thing that could unite them was an attack on their wallets. The HOA charter had a provision for an emergency meeting if 20% of homeowners signed a petition. Within 3 hours, a petition was circulating. By noon, it had more than enough signatures. The meeting was set for that night. Karen had no choice but to attend. She had lost control of the narrative. As dusk fell, I knew Karen would be desperate. She was cornered, and a cornered animal is the most dangerous. I told Fran to go to her sister's house for the night. She refused. "I'm not leaving you," she said, her chin set in that stubborn way I loved. "I started this with you, I'm finishing it with you." So, we prepared. I locked down the house. I activated every camera, every sensor. I sat in my study, watching the live feed from the camera pointed at our front door. Around 8 p.m., an hour before the meeting, they came. A dark, unmarked van pulled up to the curb. This time, it wasn't 2 clumsy thugs. It was 4 men. They moved with a fluid, silent efficiency that I recognized instantly. They were professionals. They fanned out, 2 heading for the back of the house, 2 approaching the front. They weren't here to scare me. They were here to silence me before I could get to that meeting. Karen was trying to cut the head off the snake. I wasn't in the study anymore. I was waiting in the darkened hallway. The 2 men at the front door didn't bother knocking. One used a hydraulic tool to pop the lock with a soft hiss. The door swung open. The first man stepped inside, a suppressed pistol in his hand. He took 2 steps into the entryway and stopped, his partner right behind him. They were good. They were listening, scanning, sensing. But I was better. I was in the shadows of the coat closet, less than 5 feet away. I held my breath. When the second man stepped fully inside, I moved. I exploded out of the closet, slamming the heavy closet door into the second man, pinning him against the doorframe. The first man spun, his gun coming up. I was already on him. I grabbed his weapon hand, twisting it downwards and inwards, breaking his wrist with a sickening crunch. He gasped in pain. I drove my knee into his chest, sending him stumbling backward, then brought my elbow down on the back of his neck. He crumpled to the floor, out cold. The second man had untangled himself from the door and was bringing his own weapon to bear. I didn't give him the chance. I kicked the gun out of the first man's broken hand. It skittered across the floor. I scooped it up in one smooth motion. The second man fired, the suppressor making the shot a quiet phut. The bullet tore through the plaster on the wall behind me. I didn't aim for center mass. I aimed for his leg. My shot was just as quiet. It hit him in the thigh. He screamed a choked guttural sound and collapsed, clutching his bleeding leg. Suddenly I heard a crash of glass from the back of the house. The other 2. They were in. Fran was upstairs. A wave of pure, cold rage washed over me. I left the 2 men in the entryway and sprinted toward the kitchen. They were coming through the shattered patio door, two more dark shapes, guns up, moving fast. "Clear!" one of them yelled. I flattened myself against the wall at the edge of the kitchen, using the refrigerator as cover. One of them entered, sweeping his gun across the room. As he passed my position, I lunged, tackling him low and driving him hard into the kitchen island. His head hit the marble countertop with a hollow thud. The last man standing fired twice. One bullet grazed my shoulder, a hot, searing pain. The other slammed into the refrigerator behind me. I gritted my teeth against the pain and rolled, coming up on one knee. He was good. He was already moving, seeking a better angle. But my house was my territory. I knew every shadow, every corner. He expected me to be where I was. He didn't expect the fire extinguisher. I grabbed it from its mount on the wall and blasted him full in the face with a thick cloud of white chemical foam. He staggered back, blinded and choking. It was all the time I needed. I closed the distance and dispatched him with a single, precise blow to the temple. It was over. The whole thing had taken less than 30 seconds. Silence descended on the house, broken only by the whimpering of the man I'd shot in the leg. My shoulder was burning, and my house was a wreck. But we were alive. The meeting was in less than an hour. It was time to end this. Adrenaline is a wonderful painkiller. My shoulder felt like it was on fire, but my mind was crystal clear. I took 60 seconds. 60 seconds to zip tie the 3 conscious intruders and check on the ones I'd knocked out. They'd all live. I grabbed a roll of duct tape and efficiently silenced the one who was still groaning about his leg. I hit 911 on speaker, identified myself, reported 4 intruders secured and 1 GSW to the thigh. Dispatch patched me to Sheriff Daniels. Units and an ambulance were en route, ETA 19. Then I went upstairs. Fran was at the top of the stairs, holding a heavy lamp like a club, her face pale but resolute. "Is it over?" she whispered. "For now," I said, grabbing a towel and pressing it against my bleeding shoulder. "Stay here. Lock the door. Don't open it for anyone but me." She nodded, her eyes filled with a terror that hardened my resolve into something sharp and brittle. I dragged the 4 men into the basement and locked the door, leaving them for the police to find later. Then I went back to the man I'd shot, the one who now had a strip of duct tape over his mouth. I pulled up a kitchen chair and sat down in front of him. I ripped the tape off. He winced. "Who sent you?" I asked, my voice low and even. He just glared at me, spitting blood onto the floor. "I'm not telling you anything." I sighed. I didn't have time for a lengthy interrogation. I leaned in close, my face inches from his. "Look around you," I said softly. "Look at my house. Look at your friends in my basement. Do I look like a man who has a lot of patience left? You have one chance. You can talk to me, or you can wait for the police to get here, but I can't guarantee what condition you'll be in when they arrive." Fear finally broke through his tough guy facade. He saw something in my eyes that told him I wasn't bluffing. "It was Grant," he mumbled. "Karen Grant." I nodded. "I know that. I want to know why. Why send a team like you? This isn't a simple scare tactic. This is a wet work team. Who are you people?" He hesitated. I just stared at him, my silence more menacing than any threat. "We're consultants," he finally stammered. "Private security. We handle problems for corporate clients, quietly." "So Karen Grant is a corporate client?" I pressed. "What corporation?" He shook his head. "It's not like that. She's not the client. She's a regional manager." The pieces clicked into place with a sickening thud. Karen wasn't just enriching her family. She wasn't just a woman with a personal vendetta. The shell companies, the kickbacks, the systemic embezzlement. It was too organized, too slick for one woman, no matter how intelligent. It was a corporate playbook. "What's the name of the corporation?" I demanded. He licked his dry lips. "Landev Pro," he whispered. "They're a real estate development company, a big one." Suddenly, everything made a horrible kind of sense. The Cedar Valley wasn't just a housing development. It was a cash cow. Land development professionals had built it, and they had installed Karen as the Homeowners Association president to run it. Her job was to use the HOA to systematically fleece the residents, generating millions in untraceable revenue through phony contracts and fines, which was then funneled back to the corporation. It was a parasitic relationship, with us as the hosts. My fighting back wasn't just threatening Karen's personal agenda. It was threatening a massive, illegal profit center for a powerful corporation. Then came the final, gut-wrenching twist. So, the vendetta, I said, the Grant family homestead, that was all just a story, a lie. The man actually gave a short, bitter laugh. Her family? Her family were dirt-poor tenant farmers. They never owned anything. Grant isn't even her real name. It was assigned to her. The corporation bought this land cheap 50 years ago. They knew a new highway was planned nearby. They've been sitting on it ever since. The Grant homestead story was the cover she was supposed to use if anyone got too close. A way to make her obsession seem personal and crazy, not corporate. I felt the floor drop out from under me. It was all a lie. The personal vendetta, the generational grudge that I thought was the core of her madness. It was a script, a calculated fiction created by a boardroom full of lawyers to hide a cold, ruthless corporate conspiracy. She wasn't a zealot on a holy mission. She was an employee, a middle manager in a criminal enterprise. My fight wasn't with one deranged woman. It was with a faceless, powerful corporation that had sent a team of killers to my house to protect their bottom line. The game was infinitely bigger and more dangerous than I had ever imagined. Freddy's map wasn't a clue to Karen's past. It was part of the corporation's manufactured legend. They had probably planted it in the archives themselves. I stood up, my mind reeling. The pain in my shoulder was a dull throb compared to the chilling realization of what I was up against. I had been playing chess with a pawn, not realizing there was a whole team of queens and rooks standing behind her. I looked at the clock. The meeting started in 20 minutes. My plan to expose Karen Grant in front of her neighbors suddenly seemed hopelessly naive. How could I fight a ghost? How could I take down an entity like land development professionals? I had poked the hornet's nest, and now the entire swarm was coming for me. For a full minute, I just stood there in my wrecked kitchen. The scope of it all was staggering. Land development project. A corporate behemoth playing games with people's lives, using my neighborhood as their personal ATM. Karen wasn't the mastermind. She was just the local face of a much larger evil. My plan to expose her felt like trying to take down a dragon with a pea shooter. But then, I looked at the shattered patio door, at the bullet hole in my refrigerator. I thought of Fran upstairs, holding a lamp for protection. The rage returned, cold and clarifying. I didn't care how big they were. They had brought the war to my home. I was going to bring it right back to them, starting with their star employee. I grabbed my phone and the audio recorder with the confession from the hired gun. I also grabbed the small, disguised audio bug from the clubhouse smoke detector. I put on a dark jacket to hide the blood on my shoulder, took a deep breath, and walked out my front door. 2 patrol cars were idling a block down by then. I texted dispatch the basement door code and Lev camera link, got Daniels' okay to step into the meeting, and locked the deadbolt behind me. The clubhouse was packed. Every seat was filled, and people were standing along the walls. The air was thick with anger and confusion. This wasn't the usual defeated crowd. These people were scared, but they were also furious. The anonymous email and the rumors about Gary had worked. They felt betrayed. They wanted blood. At the front of the room, Karen Grant sat at the head table. She looked poised, confident, but I could see the tension in her jaw. She scanned the crowd, her eyes searching for me. When she saw me walk in, a flicker of genuine shock crossed her face. She had expected me to be gone, a problem that had been quietly and permanently solved. Seeing me standing there, alive and very much present, threw her completely off balance. For the first time, I saw a crack in her perfect icy facade. The meeting began in chaos. People were shouting questions, demanding to know what happened to Gary, where their money was going. Karen banged her gavel, her voice sharp as she tried to regain control. "Order! This is not a mob. We will follow procedure." She tried to steer the conversation, to paint Gary as a lone embezzler, but I wasn't going to let her. I walked to the front of the room, to the single microphone set up for residents. I didn't wait my turn. I just stood there until the shouting died down and all eyes were on me. "My name is Alex Peterson," I began, my voice calm and carrying through the silent room. "And I have some information you all need to hear." Karen stood up. "Mr. Peterson, you are out of order. This is not on the agenda." I ignored her. I turned to face my neighbors. You've all been paying fines. You've been paying special assessments. You've been told it's to maintain community standards. That is a lie. I held up the audio recorder. What you were about to hear is a confession from one of the men who was sent to my house tonight to kill me. A collective gasp went through the room. I pressed play. The clear, terrified voice of the man from my kitchen filled the clubhouse. He spoke about Karen. He spoke about the fake contracts, the kickbacks. And then he spoke the name, Landev Pro. He explained the whole scheme, how the HOA was a front, how they were all being systematically robbed. I watched Karen's face. It was draining of all color. She was no longer a queen on her throne. She looked small, trapped. But I wasn't done. This was never about flowers or mailboxes, I continued, my voice rising. It was about greed. But for Karen, it was also about a story she might have even started to believe herself. I looked directly at her. The Grant family homestead, a tale of lost land, of a family legacy she was trying to reclaim. She used it to justify her obsession with my property. I paused, letting the drama build. That too was a lie. I held up the other device, the audio bug from her secret meeting. This is Karen, in her own words, from just a few nights ago. I played the clip. It was her conversation with Gary, the part where she threatened him, where she talked about creating a paper trail to frame him. But then I let it play longer. I let them hear the part where a panicked Gary, trying to save himself, shouted, "I know about Landev. I know the whole Grant story is a fake." And then Karen's voice, cold and furious. "You will be silent." The room was absolutely still. The evidence was undeniable. It was a complete, public vivisection of her power. I had turned her neighbors from a herd of sheep into a pack of wolves, and they were all staring at her. "She's a liar!" someone yelled from the back. "And a thief!" yelled another. The room erupted. The anger was no longer directed at me. It was a tidal wave directed squarely at Karen Grant. She stood there, frozen, her mask of control completely shattered. She looked cornered, desperate. Her eyes darted toward the exit. But there was nowhere to run. Just then, the main doors of the clubhouse burst open. It wasn't more of Karen's thugs. It was two uniformed police officers, followed by a detective in a rumpled suit. I had called them just before I left my house. I had emailed them the audio files and a summary of the evidence. I told them where to find the four men I had gift-wrapped in my basement. The detective walked straight up to the podium, his eyes fixed on Karen. "Karen Grant," he said, his voice booming over the chaos. "You're under arrest for conspiracy, fraud, and multiple counts of assault." As the officers moved in and snapped handcuffs on her wrists, she finally broke. Her face contorted into a mask of pure, undiluted hatred. Her eyes found mine across the room. She didn't scream. She didn't protest. She just mouthed two words at me. "You're dead." It wasn't a threat from a petty tyrant anymore. It was a promise from a disposable employee of a very powerful, very dangerous corporation. They had lost their pawn, but the game was far from over. Peace is a strange thing. For years I chased it, thinking it was a place you could find, a house you could buy. I thought it was the absence of noise, the absence of conflict. I was wrong. The downfall of Karen Grant didn't bring instant peace. It brought chaos, then a slow, quiet healing. The Cedar Valley became the talk of the town. News vans camped out on our perfect streets. Lawyers descended like vultures. Land development project, of course, denied everything. They claimed Karen was a rogue employee, a lone wolf. They cut her loose so fast it was breathtaking. They threw an army of lawyers at the problem, burying the case in motions and delays. But I had learned from my enemy. I didn't fight them in the shadows. I fought them in the light. I gave my evidence, the audio files, the financial records, to every reporter who would listen. The story of the corporate-controlled HOA went national. Other Landev Pro communities across the country started their own investigations. Class action lawsuits piled up. The corporation that thought it was untouchable was bleeding from 1,000 cuts. Their stock plummeted. The federal investigation I thought would take years was fast-tracked by the public pressure. They were wounded, badly. Back in the Cedar Valley, things changed. The HOA was dissolved and then reformed under a new charter written by the residents. The ridiculous rules were abolished. The beige paint was covered over in a riot of different colors. People planted whatever flowers they wanted. Neighbor Freddie was elected against all odds as the new president. His first official act was to try and pass a bylaw requiring tinfoil hats at all community gatherings to block the corporate mind control rays. It was soundly defeated, but everyone loved him for it. The fear was gone, replaced by a sense of community we never had under Karen's rule. We were no longer just residents. We were survivors. Months later, Fran and I were sitting on our back deck. The deck that had been declared a violation. The new wood was still fresh. My shoulder had healed, leaving a faint scar as a souvenir. Fran's roses were gone, but she had planted a new garden, a wild, beautiful tangle of flowers that broke every rule in the old HOA handbook. It was perfect. She leaned her head on my good shoulder. "Is it really over?" she asked. I thought about Karen Grant, sitting in a jail cell, abandoned by her corporate masters, refusing any plea deal out of pure, stubborn spite. I thought about Land Dev Pro, still fighting, still dangerous, but exposed and weakened. The war wasn't won, but the battle for our home was. "Yes," I said. "It's over. I had learned how far a man will go to defend his own. He'll go all the way. He'll become a monster to fight a monster. He'll burn down a corrupt world to protect his own small patch of it." I looked at my wife, at my home, at the setting sun painting the sky. I had found my peace. It wasn't a place you could buy. It was a thing you had to build, a thing you had to earn, a thing you had to be willing to fight for.